Hafaday and good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. This informational briefing by the Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security is now called in order. It is now 2:08 p.m. For the record and in accordance with 5 GCA Chapter 8, subsection 8107, notices were sent out via email to all centers and all main media broadcasting outlets on November 28, 2017, and the second notice on December 4, 2017. The purpose of this informational briefing is to help the committee and the general public to understand issues of concern regarding recent water outages, island-wide system upgrades, system development and charge, plans to upgrade the Northern District wastewater treatment plant, water rate increases, island-wide water wells, and PFOS and PFOA in water wells returned by the military. We have with us today in attendance Angel Marquez from Guam EPA, Johnny Abadania, okay, Guam EPA, Gilda Mofnis from GWA, Senator Bamba from the CCU, Marianne McDonald, GWA, Vanji Lujan, GWA, Sabina Perez, Bill Chang of BNC, Kurt Biltz of BNC, Joey Duenas, the chairman of CCU, Miguel Bordalio, GWA's general manager, and Mr. Greg Cruz from GWA. Thank you. You didn't sign in, but Mr. Kurt is here as well. Thank you, CCU members and GWA, for coming in during this Christmas season and taking the time out for this informational briefing. I'd like to first start with you introducing yourselves, and then we can move in towards the discussion of the agenda. I kind of changed the agenda a little bit to first address the SDC rates, and then also some of the outages happening in Mount Santa Rosa, which was highlighted earlier these past couple months. And so I'd like to give you an opportunity to speak on that, and then we'll go into the island water wells. Because I think the island water wells is it's a little bit more technical and in-depth, especially because we have representatives from WERI here. So I'd like to touch the lighter issues first. Okay, we can start with you, General Manager Bordalio.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Miguel Bordalio. I'm the General Manager of the Guam Waterworks Authority. Do you want introductions before we start from everybody?
Yes, please, yes.
Okay.
Madam Senator, thank you for inviting us today. My name is Joey Duenas. I'm the chairman of the CCU.
Thank you, Senator. My name is George Bamba, and I'm the member of the CCU and its secretary.
Kelly Clark, General Counsel, GWA.
And Greg Cruz, GWA CFO.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Clark. We'll just go right into first discussing the recent water outage that occurred in Mount Santa Rosa, because this apparently brought a lot of attention to the public. Mount Santa Rosa went several weeks without water. Of course, you did put some mitigations in place to ensure they had some kind of access to water. But can you please discuss some of the incidences that happened and the steps that you took to ensure that now Santa Rosa has their water and this will not be a recurring factor?
Okay, to summarize the issue that occurred, we had a major production well in Jigo go down. We had some issues with the motor, and it's a large capacity well, high production, and its primary area of service is along Route 15, the higher elevations of Jigo and Mount Santa Rosa. That was a couple months prior to that, we experienced a similar pump and motor failure at another high capacity large production well in Jigo, not the same one, a different one, but they use the same size pump and same size motor. And the inventory that we had, spare inventory that we had, was depleted when that other well went down in August. At that time, we had already had an order in place, but because of the procurement regulations, we had to get the procurement cleared with the Public Utilities Commission. It was approved at the end of July. The first well issue happened the early part of August. So the order was placed and in progress, but we had not received it. And so when it did, we air freighted it in. When it did come in, there was this, it was immediately put into service. The remaining pump was then, that was part of that order, at the same size, was in production at the time. So when the second outage happened in October, the one that caused the extended period of low to no water pressure in those areas of Jigo and the outage in Mount Santa Rosa, that well, or that motor was just being released from the factory. And so it took us a while to get it in place. In the interim, we did put in what motor and pump we did have available in inventory of a smaller size, and it provided some limited production, not the full amount and not the same pressure that is normally the output of that well. And so we weren't able to get water all the way up to the reservoir. So certain lower areas were available to get their water back, but the upper areas of Santa Rosa, especially the areas above the existing reservoir, were without water. And so the provisions, we put temporary provisions in place. We had a tanker up there in order to provide some relief, but the long and short of it was we had depleted our inventory. By way of comparison, in the previous years, we see approximately 35 to 38 failures for our pumps and motors every year. So the anticipated service life of these pumps and motors should be around 3 to 5 years. Based on our recent history and the analysis that we've done, the maximum service life for recently replaced pumps has been only 2.5 years. So that kind of coincides with this, replacing 38 pumps or motors out of 120 wells every year. Well, this year has been particularly troublesome for us, and I think we're close to doubling that number in the last 12 months. And we believe in our analysis that in large part it has been due to some, the August outage, for example, had to do with some very heavy weather and lightning strikes, which affected the electrical distribution system and then resulted in some of the problems that we had at several wells, not just the one in Jigo. So we're seeing more issues, and we've made attempts with Guam Power Authority to help us analyze what those issues are and how they are affecting the life of our pumps and motors. And so we've reestablished a joint task force between the Power Authority and the Waterworks Authority to analyze the information that we're seeing regarding these pump failures. That is a long-term process in order for us to analyze this and make the corrections, but we have started. We've in the data sheet that I provided you, we have some specific actions that we've outlined and are already starting to take. We've completed some electrical grounding issues at a lot of our well sites. We are procuring additional electrical monitoring equipment to do some long-term monitoring on the kind of power that we see coming into our well facilities. We've also been tracking more frequently nuisance trips, which we believe to be part of the reason why we're experiencing these frequent failures. And we've also revised our pump replacement standard operating procedures to include more detailed information gathering in the form of checklists and analysis and reports when we do have a failure. So all of this information will be brought to bear for us to jointly with GPA figure out how best to address modifications that need to be made at our facilities or adjustments that need to be made to their distribution system in order to balance voltages and currents and ensure that the incoming power does not lead to premature failure of our equipment. With respect specifically to Mount Santa Rosa, some actions that we are undertaking and also plan to undertake in the future, I've mentioned before in previous informational briefings, our pressure zone realignment project. The intent would be to match the service pressures that are required at the elevations of Mount Santa Rosa and surrounding areas with the configuration of the distribution system. So we have a dedicated source to serve that pressure zone, and we isolate it from other pressure zones so we don't lose water coming out of that area going to other parts of Jigo. So essentially between Jigo and Mount Santa Rosa, there are several areas which are commingled and are served by multiple sources. The pressure zone realignment will isolate the zones so that we have some sources that are matched to Jigo's elevations and sources that are matched to Mount Santa Rosa's elevations. Therefore, we get more stable pressure, better supply, and better storage. We also have the reservoir replacement projects. Jigo is currently in process. There will be a booster pump station there that will be constructed. There isn't one there now, and that will afford us the opportunity to pump directly if we need to, with some minor modifications, to pump directly to the Mount Santa Rosa zone. And then the Santa Rosa Reservoir is also slated for replacement, and we do have that design almost completed, and we should be advertising it for construction in the coming weeks.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? Mr. Berdalio, Santa Rosa is the well is looking to be replaced, the tank system?
The reservoir at Mount Santa Rosa is slated for replacement.
Replacement. Is there a possibility of relocation? I think because some of the challenges, right, is some of the reservoirs are placed at the bottom in certain areas in Guam, also in some instances in Nimitz Hill.
The current location of the reservoir, when it was constructed, was intended to service the higher elevations of Jigo in the Mount Santa Rosa area, and then subsequent to that, I think development took place above the reservoir. Yes. And so we are also looking into the possibility of a smaller reservoir placed
at the top?
Further at the top. There are challenges, as you know, associated with that. We have not established if there is sufficient property. We might need to acquire property, you know. So that's a bit down the road, but we are looking at that, yes. But the replacement of the existing reservoir is already on the books. It is a project that has been designed, and so that one's going to go forward.
So you probably might not look into this for like another 10 years or so?
No. It'll be sooner than that. I'm just saying the timing of the construction. When we get Santa Rosa Reservoir replaced, we won't likely at that time also provide another one higher up.
Okay, very good. And, you know, I want to thank you for the improvements that you've done, you know, the lessons learned that you have taken during this event, because I know it was not easy to haul in a new motor system for this specific reservoir, and also the improvements of the way you source your product and put it back out into the resources to provide for the island, because when we were sending some general questions during this time to GWA, we were kind of getting open-ended answers, and so I think that you improving your SOP and, you know, also including the checklist and ensuring that everything is accounted for, it will really help with the transitions that you face during this time.
Thank you.
And so thank you for that. And
Senator, could I add to what
yes, Chairman.
the General Manager said? Santa Rosa is one of a few areas throughout the island that pose specific problems, and it poses problems because of the way the system was designed. It was not designed properly, and you hit it right on the head. There needs to be a reservoir at the top, at the very top, and there wasn't one. And when the reservoir was put in, there weren't houses above that reservoir. And then, you know, the government of Guam allowed people to develop their property above there. They put a water pipe in, but that's not going to do the job. And so we are going to put another tank up at the top. If you look at that Mount Santa Rosa area, for example, where our current reservoir is located, there is a military reservoir, because they have communications equipment in that area. And for fire suppression, they need their own water. So they have a reservoir. At the very top of that mountain is more communication equipment, and the military has another tank up there. But what the government of Guam didn't do prior to the CCU was they never put a tank up there. They just put a line up, which works well as long as everything is working. But the minute you have one problem, you have a problem with that. And that, again, I go back, is a design problem from the way back, because they allowed people to build houses without putting in the proper infrastructure. So I'm glad you noticed that. Thank you very much.
If I may just add one other thing that I failed to touch upon, we did also implement some changes to our inventory management on this issue. So we have established minimum inventory amounts for all of our pumps and motors in various sizes. We've established that, and I don't think that has been done previously. We have also implemented automatic reordering points, so when we get to certain minimum levels in the warehouse, the order is placed, and we don't wait until we don't have anything. We're trying to streamline the procurement process also, and we're taking another look at some of the policies that we have in place which limit our sources for some of this equipment, and we're trying to expand that to provide multiple avenues of procurement, so we have a bit more flexibility in terms of keeping what we need in stock. And we've also,
because when you need to purchase something, you have to go through PUC for a dollar amount to get the approval of purchase.
In this instance, we did because it was an existing contract that exceeded the threshold that required PUC approval. When the procurement was first done, we weren't anticipating that it would exceed that threshold, so there was not a requirement to file it with the PUC. But as we've gone on through the years, and especially this year with the increased number of failures that I mentioned, we've nearly doubled from previous years, it did cause our procurement, the amounts that we need to spend, to exceed that threshold. And as soon as we realized that, we filed it with the PUC. But that whole process, as you know, takes some time. And unfortunately, the victims of that process were the residents of Mount Santa Rosa, because we couldn't get the order filled quickly enough. And so there are some failings on our part. We're expanding our supply chain, hopefully, so that we have a little more flexibility in the future.
Okay.
And in addition to that, what we're doing is we're trying to establish a greater inventory amount. For example, at GPA, they have a total inventory of $20 million that they keep on stock all the time. That was never at PUAG or GWA in the early days. So that's changing. The general manager has begun to put new SOPs in place, put new ways of practicing and processes in place to accomplish that. So I think we're well on the way to establishing that increased level of inventory that you have to maintain. And it's going to cost money, but you maintain that inventory so that we don't have a repeat of these incidences.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to move now to the island-wide system upgrades. So can you just please give us the list of the projects that you've been doing and some of the upgrades that you have done? I think really the concern is what portions of the system development charge are you using for these upgrades? And so perhaps you can talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So for the system development charge, I provided you with a summary of where we are with what's been collected both for water and sewer SDCs. And what's been paid into the system right now is about $10.1 million. With regard to the uses of those funds, we have in our current capital improvement program, which I think we updated last January and provided your office with a copy, several line items and projects for which we've allocated SDC funds to help pay for some of those improvements. Specifically, we have new water wells or upgrade or rehabilitation of existing water wells to increase their capacity. We have allocated $3 million for that CIP project. Water distribution system pipe replacements, we've spent a significant amount of money on that already, and we have earmarked an additional $2.3 million approximately for that CIP project.
Mr. Berdalia, the
Yes.
water distribution system pipe replacement, is this going to go to alleviate the water loss?
In part, it will. The intent is to take care of our oldest and worst worst condition pipes. The other thing it will alleviate is it will eliminate old 2-inch lines and replace them with what we require now in our standards is 6-inch lines to support fire flow. So, but in the process of replacing those lines, we do expect to see improvements in the non-revenue water. That's correct.
And will this also impact the ratepayer, you know, like areas in the village where they're experiencing low water pressure because of certain leaks
and small line sizes? Yes.
Yes, okay. Could we get a copy of perhaps the specific areas that you're going to for this water distribution system pipe replacement, the specific villages you're looking at, the route of the piping and so forth for the $2.3 million that you're setting aside?
Sure. I think I've previously submitted to you, we've been through 3 phases already, which have been complete. I gave you a listing of that and the amounts of pipe and valves that we've replaced. And then we're currently in phase 4.
Okay.
Right? And for phases 1 through 4, we've already,
yes.
When that's completed, it'll be 21 miles of distribution lines that we've replaced.
Okay.
We can work on getting you what is in our master plan for additional line replacement programs.
Yes, that would help, so that we can let the public know that the system is also being not just based on CIPs and according with the bond covenant, but also to at the best interest of the ratepayer.
Okay. Yes, happy to do that.
Okay.
I will mention, related to that, we are updating our master plan. It's a 20-year planning document. We anticipate completion of that in the early part of next year. One of the things related to line replacements, which aren't a CIP, but which do relate to the SDCs, part of what we've done with the implementation guidelines is clarify some of the definitions of water improvement projects and wastewater improvement projects. The definitions of those 2 things are inconsistent, and it creates some problems for us in trying to implement the use of the SDCs in accordance with the guidelines. That when they were originally written, there was the language conflicted. So we resolved that conflict with these revisions that we've have before the PUC now, and the CIP line items that we talked about using SDC funds are larger projects in neighborhoods where we know we have issues, and so we can put designs together and package it and put it out to bid and have a contractor do it. There are smaller pockets where we do have problems with smaller lines, as you mentioned, and the ratepayers are affected by low service pressures. What we're hoping is that with these revisions, we will be able to make smaller line replacements in-house, because we may not know, these might be areas where we don't have good documentation of where those lines were initially installed, and it's difficult for us to prepare engineering drawings and put it out to bid because the areas are smaller. So if we do those in-house, we feel we'll have a greater impact on some of these smaller pockets to serve a wider range of communities.
Okay, and thank you for bringing that up, because that is some of the concerns that I have, is that we use the system development charge for other CIP projects that it wasn't originally intended to be used for. So when I'm thinking system development charge, I'm thinking these are our everyday working class folks that pay their water bill on time, and then they should receive a continued service, right, without any breaks. And so because of the recent consent decree, you know, there are other projects that you are allowed to borrow, that GWA was authorized to go borrow money to make fixes to meet the specifics of the consent decree. So I just want to make sure that when the SDC is being utilized, because it has not been utilized for a very long time, and you know, I'm glad that you're looking at it now, but I want to make sure that it directly impacts the ratepayer and doesn't go towards an agreement with the consent decree, you know, that we're using the funds accordingly for the people.
Right, I
because
understand.
they're the ones that paid into the system development charge.
And the CIP projects that I mentioned will, obviously, if we put in more water wells, and I can think of a couple specific areas up north where there's perennial low service pressures because they're just so far away from any production source. So putting wells in these areas where there are none now will provide a benefit to the ratepayers in those areas. So
Okay.
in these instances, the CIPs that I'm reading to, they do have a direct benefit to the ratepayer.
Okay.
In addition to those water projects, we also have planned use of the SDCs for wastewater treatment plant upgrades. We have $1.3 million allocated for that. One specific project, the Umatic Mauricio wastewater treatment plant replacement, we also have $1.5 million allocated for SDC funds to help us pay for that. And then the wastewater collection system expansion, we have $1.68 million allocated for that. So the total of those planned expenditures are about 9.79 million.
So for, pardon me, so for the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, where's this located at?
These are just, it's a generic line item for priority one upgrades. So if there are critical issues in any wastewater treatment plant,
Okay.
that CIP line item is intended to take care of that. So we.
Could you use the consent decree, the bond, the money that you went to borrow for this? And also the Umatic Mauricio wastewater treatment plant replacement. I thought that that was one of your projects that you're looking to pay with that
It's a
$450
combination.
million authorization.
Yeah, the amount that you see here is a portion of the total amount for that project. It's a large project, so part of the funding is coming from SDCs, but it also does use
see.
bond funded.
What is the total for that, the Umatic Mauricio wastewater treatment plant replacement? 12?
18? 18 million.
18 mil? And then the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, is that, are you going to use any of that money from the consent decree for the wastewater treatment plant upgrades? Or is it only, are you only projecting it to cost $1.3 million?
1.3 million was the amount we had allocated. There are specific projects which, for example, the Baza Gardens project that also, and the Agate Santa Rita wastewater, those are consent decree or court order projects that we're currently undertaking, which are primarily funded through the bond funds, not SDCs.
I see. And then your wastewater system expansion, can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is for us to increase collection line sizes. If they're undersized and causing capacity issues, we can use these funds to enlarge them or to extend them if we need to. So that's specifically what we have allocated for this. I think the two projects that we may have been earmarked for this include lines in the Talafofo area, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't have all the details of that, but we can provide
That's
you
okay.
additional information if you need.
Yes, please, thank you. So this, the wastewater system expansion, is this being also supplemented with the $450 million that it has been gone out to borrow, the bond?
It may be, yes. Yes.
So it would cost more than 1.68 million?
Yes, that's just a portion of SDC funds which we would allocate to use.
And what is the total cost?
I'm sorry, Senator, I don't have that information. I'd have to refer back to the CIP. In fact, it might,
Okay.
it's in there, the total cost. The project is in there and all the different funding sources are identified in the CIP.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about the system development charge rules and regulations. What I just recently received, maybe about a month and a half ago, new rules and regulations being proposed. So if you could talk a little bit about the current rules and regulations under the SDC and then the new rules and regulations that is being proposed to the PUC.
So the implementation guidelines is what we have recently received approval for from the CCUM, which is before the PUC now. And essentially, the revisions that we have proposed for these guidelines take care of several things. Most notably, they take care of conflicting language or inaccuracies in the original document, and so it's kind of a cleanup. And then, in addition to that, there have been some public laws that have come on the books, which, for example, the Affordable Housing System Development Charge, which came on the books after the implementation guidelines were developed. So the original implementation guidelines were silent on this, and so we've included revisions.
Can I just inquire real quick on the Affordable Housing System Development Charge real quick? can you just tell the public what year that law came into place? And then you have a dollar amount of $210,000, which is inclusive of the house and also the lot.
That's correct.
And so I just want to know if you can tell the public the year the law came into place and where you got how you calculated the $210,000 amount.
Mo, do you know the year? So it was passed in 2013,
Okay.
and the amount, if I'm not mistaken, was it, I'm not sure if it was included in the law or if we calculated it. I think it was included in, it was in the law. So I don't think we had a part in how it was calculated, but it was included in the public law.
Okay. So and that's my concern is the Affordable Housing System Development Charge. It says, let me just pull this up. It says, it means the SDC made available to any person who constructs or causes to construct affordable homes as their primary residence for an immediate family member where the total cost of the home and lot does not exceed $210,000 pursuant to Section 19 of these guidelines. And so if you go to I'm just doing this for the public so that they are following along. The proposed system development charge implementation guidelines update, resolution number 52-FY 2017 from the CCU. If you go to Section 19, it addresses the AHSDC is what you call it, but actually it should be Section 20, and it says Affordable Housing System Development Charge, and it discusses who it applies to and the cost, and they use the HUD median income statistic as a what is it, the foundation of this cost. And there's a little bit of concern because we all know that it costs, just for a 1,000 square foot home, it's gonna cost, now it's $200 per square foot to build a home. And so just the home by itself could cost upwards to $200,000, not inclusive of the property that it is on. And so I'm just thinking, was there a statute in place that you have to, that you have to follow for that value? For that value, because I'm wondering if you could increase the value, because a middle-class family, or even a low upper-class family, or low middle upper-class family would still have a home that is in the upwards of now $250,000 just to build, and it does not include the lot, right?
And I'm certain that with the recent change in the construction climate, that's a question worth looking at. I would say that the values that are included in what we've proposed, the revisions that we've proposed, were only to make us whole with that public law that had passed and which was not included in the original guidelines. If the revision to that number is desired, we can certainly take a look at how we would recommend any changes, and we could share that information with you. And if the senator would like to introduce legislation to that effect, then we would help you, support you in that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'd like to see what we can do to increase the value amount for the home, if it's even possible, right? If there's no federal guideline stopping us from doing so, and if you don't have a bond covenant that regulates you do this, right? If we could make sure that if you do a bond covenant or of any sort, because I know you guys went to the markets, if we could put some kind of safety measure in place to kind of raise the value of the home so that it can be an affordable home, really, because the cost of building a house on Guam to include the property that it is on top of for a middle-class family, or the right below the middle-class family is what I'm trying to say, but they're still working class.
Right. Understand.
So that they can be able to build their own home with the cost of the infrastructure.
Fortunately, I have a very talented team of individuals who are more than willing to assist me in that task. So we could put something together in.
Mr. Clark and Mr. Cruz. And everyone else. Okay.
The chief engineer and Ms. Maureen Kenga.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And so in the future, we'll reach out to you and see what we can do if it's even possible.
Sure.
I just don't want to have any bond covenants done and then we can't address this, because the bond covenants really tie up a lot of the services that the autonomous agencies can provide for the people at a more compassionate cost. Yes.
We'll take a look at that and report back to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, please continue. We were discussing the differences of the SDC and now your implementation guidelines that you have brought before the PUC.
Right. So the other major issue or inclusion that was done in the revisions, which was left out of the original language, I think it had to do with clarification on offsets, which is the amount of a reduction in the SDC that could be attributed to contributions, to direct contributions by a developer for facilities that would be provided and then integrated into our system. So I think we've included some language to clarify that as was requested by the PUC. So there's also some omissions that we took care of. The original language did not address the definition of a political subdivision, and it's used in the guidelines in a couple different locations, so we've included that definition in the proposed revisions. As I mentioned, we made eliminated some conflicts between what is considered a sewer facility expansion and a water infrastructure expansion, so those conflicts have been removed.
And some of the concerns were some of the home builders that I've been talking with, when it talks about wastewater connection, it's cheaper sometimes for them to build a septic tank than for them to have to hook up to the sewage system that's 50 feet away. So I'm wondering if you put anything specific to address this cost. No. Could you include something?
In that instance, if they're within a certain distance of an existing sewer,
sometimes the sewer's 15 feet away and it's still excruciating
they don't connect to it. Well, there's a requirement for them to connect to it, and enforcement of that requirement is primarily handled by Guam EPA. We have been working with them to identify areas where that happens. There are specific neighborhoods where maybe when the neighborhood was first started, there was not sewer, but sewer has been put in, and they are now within the proper distance to connect. Guam EPA did provide funding to the Waterworks Authority for a revolving fund to assist homeowners in dealing with the costs of connection. However, the amount of funding was limited, and there are some limitations with that, and we're working with them right now to figure out how we can structure that program so that it's actually useful. Right now, I quite frankly could say that it's not very useful, and we'd like it to be. We'd like it to be a resource that ratepayers can use, because we have an internally stated goal of getting more people off of septic and getting them onto the sewer system in order to protect our groundwater aquifer, which is, as you know, important to us and important to everybody who lives on Guam. So
this is a collaborative program with GWA and Guam EPA.
Yes.
And this program is in place now and can be utilized by ratepayers, or are you working to develop the program?
It is in place, but there are limitations. For example, the cost of connection, there's a limitation of the amount that can be borrowed under the revolving fund. We're looking to how we can revise that, because the limitation on the amount they can borrow is below what we estimate to be the typical cost of connection. So we're trying to have those two bars meet so that they can effectively finance the cost of connection. In addition to that, if there's a possibility, we're looking at if there's a possibility for us to use SDC funds to kind of provide an additional seeding of that revolving fund, and then it will turn itself over. We can allow more residents to take advantage of that program. Currently, there's such limitations on it that it is not an effective program, and we're working hard with Guam EPA to try and fix that and make it more effective.
Okay, thank you. There is one other item that I wanted to bring up in your new implementation guidelines. It is on page 15, and it's the amortized system development charges. Basically, you have the initial charge of water and wastewater. So your initial charge of $500, and the amortized payment would be a monthly charge. This is for hookup to water, a monthly charge for 96 months, approximately 8 years at $22.58. And then your wastewater charge, the initial charge is $500, and the monthly charge for 96 months, a total of 8 years, is $41.29. And below that, there's an interest rate of 7.5%. Can you talk a little bit about where you got this number and why is the interest rate so high? Because it's a pretty high interest rate. Not unless it's always been in existence, but I didn't see it.
I'll ask the CFO he's more familiar with this, how that was calculated.
Thank you.
Senator, my recollection is the interest rate was established by the PUC by way of their consultants at the time. So.
What year was that, Mr. Cruz?
I believe it's around 2012, sometime around that.
So you're using an interest rate from 2012, what PUC recommended in 2012 at that 7.5%.
Yes.
Do you know how PUC came across this 7.5% number?
I'm not familiar, Senator.
Okay. Because if it's lower than what it should be today, then okay. But if it's higher than what it should be today, then if we can adjust the number, right?
Right.
I mean, we're thinking about the people, right? We have to help them in whatever way we can. This is working class. These are not people looking out for a handout. This is our working class people, and in order for them to develop the island and connect to, have some kind of industry and home building, it creates jobs, and it comes full circle. So if we could alleviate whatever financial requirements to help people build their homes, to help create jobs, to help pay taxes, real estate taxes, this all comes full circle back to the government. And so really I'm hoping that we can work in partnership with the PUC to see if this percentage rate could be decreased.
Senator, could I just interject something, though?
Sure,
I mean,
yes.
At the end of the day, you have to understand that the system that we have has a lot of poorly designed areas that we're trying to correct.
Okay.
But we are limited in terms of the amount of money we have available to do that. So it comes down to when we start talking about system development charge and how much people have to pay, I realize it's a hardship for them, but at the same time, we lack money to subsidize these things for the builders and the homeowners. That has to be recognized at some point. Mm-hmm. We have areas all over the island where you have these 2-inch lines. They should not have been allowed, but they were allowed. So now we're coming back to correct the problem. We are looking for ways to do that, and we have a plan.
Yeah, and I appreciate.
And it's going to be over a period of time.
I appreciate that, Chairman. But the reason why I'm so big on this system development charge is because several months ago, we were at, I believe, $9 to $10 million of the system development charge. Mm-hmm. And the system development charge has been in place for quite some time. Mm-hmm. And so there really has not been a use of the system development charge until the general manager today is presenting a plan. And so
you're absolutely right.
Yes, and so essentially, you can say all that. You can say all that and say there's no, we need to upgrade the system, yada, yada, yada. But if you haven't been doing it for an X amount of years using the system development charge, collected funds, then it brings into question, is the system development charge really necessary? And I know that, there's a lot behind the scenes that go on with this, but you cannot deny that this money has not been touched for quite some time.
That's true.
And so that's just
And
my
there are-
concern,
there-
Chairman.
But there are reasons for that, and we have been so busy trying to complete the big problems that we've had that we are now catching up now to getting
Yes.
around to all the other things. That's why, quite frankly, I
But the
think
money's
when
been
you
sitting, Chairman, and it's been collecting. That's my
and,
point.
and but it's going to be put to use in the right way. It took us time to develop the program and to come up with the things because we're so far behind on all the big things, the things we got sued for. I'm just trying to give you a perspective that I think when you see the revised master plan, you're going to be astounded by the number that it comes out with.
I'm very astounded. I know I've seen it, and I'm also astounded that the people of Guam are going to pay $450 million plus capital interest, plus all the other interest that comes with it. So that's also what I'm astounded by. But thank you, Chairman, for sharing your thoughts. I appreciate that. I'd like to go now, General Manager, to discuss some of the island water wells and the contamination. So if you just bear with me and I just...
Okay. I believe you inquired about
Let's specifically discuss the PFOS and PFOA in water wells returned by the military, because that has been some contention. And so if you could just tell us what water wells have been returned to the government of Guam by the military, and what additional water wells will we be anticipating to receive by the military, if any? Okay. Thank you.
So primarily with regard to PFOS contamination, GWA has been dealing with this issue at the former military well NAS-1, which is located in Tizen. We sampled this well as part of the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule 3 back in 2015. That program is designed to, it's a nationwide net that is cast to determine what up and coming contaminants.
This sheet is what you're talking about,
Yes.
right? Okay.
So that's a program that identifies up and coming contaminants that the EPA may consider for regulation but are not regulated. So in 2015, we sampled several wells, and NAS-1 came back positive for PFOS in its source water at a level of 67 parts per trillion. Another round of sampling was conducted in September of 2015, and the PFOS levels had risen to 110 parts per trillion. Subsequent to those samples, US EPA revised their advisory limit for long-term exposure to a level that was, I believe, upwards of 200 parts per trillion to 70 parts per trillion. At that point, the raw water or the water at NAS-1 was above that revised advisory limit. It came to our attention in 2016. We took additional samples. We shut the well off, and then, but we did take some additional samples in August of 2016, and we got a no detect in that well, meaning that there was no PFOS detected. We sampled it again in June of 2017. Keep in mind that at that point it had continued to be offline and not providing any water into our distribution system. So in June of 2017, the sample results came back at 30 parts per trillion, which was below the advisory level. We still did not turn it on at that point. We committed to taking over a treatment system that was owned by not owned by GWA, but under the control of the International Airport Authority. And we took over that treatment system and refurbished it, and in October of this year, we got it back online, and we tested the water again, and the raw water tested at 23 parts per trillion, still under the advisory level of 70. And after the carbon filters that we put in, that we refurbished as part of that treatment system, the water had no detected amounts of PFOS. So what was proposed to enter our distribution system was clean water without any traces of PFOS. We submitted those results to Guam EPA, and they concurred with our recommendation to return that well to service, which we did in early November. And so now NAS-1 is back online and providing clean water into the distribution system at Tijan under the watchful eye of Guam EPA and our own compliance and safety AGM. So we continue to monitor, and we will continue to sample and analyze the water coming out of NAS-1 for PFOS in accordance with Guam EPA's requirements. When we got it back online in response to the issues that we were having with production both in Tijan and in the Barrigada area and Mount Santa Rosa. So we did some temporary modifications to the piping because it was old and the valves weren't working. So we've configured it in temporary fashion to get it back online. When we get a long enough break from, in order so that we won't impact DOE and their school operations in Tijan, when we get a long enough break, we'll try to do Christmas if we can get it done. If we can't, we'll wait until the summer. But we will definitely install permanent repairs to the piping on that treatment system. We will put in new valves and new pipe and fittings so that we don't have any issues with that, and it'll make it easier and safer for our operators to operate, and we'll bring it back online, hoping we can do it by Christmas, but that's our plan. One thing I'll note is GWA has undertaken all of this work and expended all of these funds, and we do not have ownership of that system. It was the airports and their environmental consultants' obligation to operate that treatment system. They were not using it for the contaminants that it was originally built for. And when PFOS became an issue, we offered to take it off their hands and invest what we needed to invest in order to get it up and running, which we've done. But we still are working with Guam EPA to secure ownership of that treatment system so that there are no issues between us and the airport authority on that.
Okay, thank you. Just to summarize, I'm having some difficulty with the sound here. So the only well that has been received by the government of Guam from the military is NAS-1.
That's the only well that was received that has an issue with PFOS.
The only well received and had PFOS as of March 18, 2015?
Yes.
Was testing done prior to that as well?
I don't believe so. I believe that, as I mentioned, that it was part of the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And the first time that I believe any water utility tested for PFOS was as part of that program with US EPA.
And can you give me the names of the other wells that were received by the government of Guam from the military?
I don't have a listing of that, and a lot of it obviously predates me, but I'm not sure that there's a comprehensive listing of that at GWA, but if there is, we'll provide you one.
Okay. And then, so you received the NAS-1, you found that there was a PFOS present in the well, and you used the government's money to mitigate some of to reduce the PFOS levels. So you installed carbon filters.
The filters were there. All we did was we spent money to replace the media, the carbon itself, and we've expended some resources to provide those temporary piping modifications to allow us to run it. The well was being run for our benefit and providing water into our distribution system prior to PFOS becoming an issue. So it's our obligation to treat the water and make sure that it's safe for our customers, and that's what we've done.
And now, currently, on October 29, 2017, because this well is online, which means people are receiving water from this well,
That's right.
you have a PFAS rating of 23 parts per trillion.
Which is below US EPA's advisory level of 70 parts per trillion.
Right. And I understand that in some municipalities that, take New Jersey for an example, they have a regulated PFAS level of, I believe it's 14 parts per trillion. So in the municipality, they set that regulation themselves. And I understand that we're going by the EPA advisory level. Perhaps we could do better.
At this point, Senator, it's an advisory level, and there have not been any regulations promulgated by US EPA to make it part of Safe Drinking Water Act. Mr. Marquez can correct me if I'm wrong, but it has not become a contaminant that is regulated by US EPA at this time.
Okay. Right, very good.
Yeah, just a point to clarify, as you'll see on the table that I provided you, the raw water is at 23. But I did mention that in the treated water after the filter, there are no detectable levels of PFOS. So we don't have anything entering the distribution system.
Okay. And I think you mentioned this, but I'm going to ask the question anyways, okay?
Sure.
Are there any agreements put into place when NAS wells located in Tidzin at the former Naval Air Station were returned to the people of Guam, and was any testing done at the time of the turnover?
I'm sure there was. I am aware of an agreement which I know one exists that had to do with the Navy providing funds and to the Guam Airport Authority to treat contaminants that were detected at the time. My understanding is that those funds have been used to provide the treatment system that is currently at NAS-1 and to operate it and to maintain it over those intervening years between when it was returned to the government of Guam and now. And over that time frame, the original chemicals of concern that were being treated attenuated, and they are no longer in the raw water. And that is the reason why the airport authority was not actively using that treatment system at the time PFOS came up. So to my understanding, what's in that agreement between Guam EPA, the airport authority and government of Guam, and the Navy, it was for chemicals and PFOS was not on that list. So it was, if I'm not mistaken, TCE and PCE. There might have been others, but those chemicals are no longer in the water that we pump out of NAS-1.
Okay, and I understand that in some other wells that there was also PFAS detected.
Yes, in our system?
Yes, in our system. Can you mention the wells and what is GWA doing to address the high levels of PFAS?
The two other wells are A23 and A25, both of which are located in Agana, between Agana and Sinahanya. Those wells both remain offline, and we are taking steps now. Once we complete the permanent repairs to the permanent modifications to the piping at NAS-1, we will then proceed with relocating existing carbon vessels that we have in our possession and in our facilities. We will relocate them to one or both of those wells, and then conduct the same sort of modifications to the piping, replace the valves, get the system back up and ready for use, replace the carbon media, and then we'll conduct similar testing to verify that it's effective. And once the water tests clean, we will return those wells to service.
And how many of those wells are there that you are looking at?
Just two.
Two.
I don't have a summary of the sample and analysis results for those two wells, but I can provide that information to the senator if she so pleases.
Yes, please, because I'm looking at the March 18th, 2015 testing report that GWA conducted, and it has, well, A23 with a PFOS rate of 220 parts per trillion, and then A30. So those are the two you're talking.
A23 and A25 are the ones that
A23,
exceeded
yes.
the advisory level.
Okay. And then you have the A04 at 41.
Yeah.
Has that improved?
It's in service.
It's still at 40. Okay.
I-
So it's not online then? If
It
it's-
is online. It's below the advisory level, so USEPA.
You just left it at that?
Yeah, they have no issues with us running it.
Okay.
Keep in mind that the advisory level is for chronic long-term exposure. So it's not something that, you know, a single drop is going to do any harm. The reason why they structured it that way is because it takes years and years and years of constant usage in order for it to affect a small mouse.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the basis of their testing, right? So,
Okay. I know you make that example, but for me, I'm thinking if there's a dead dog in a well and we keep on putting water in it, the dead dog is still there, right? And it's still contaminated. No, so I'm thinking, let's remove the dead dog and clean the well. But I understand that
yeah, and the other
you're
thing,
using the federal regulation guidelines to make sure that this is safe and acceptable water.
Right.
And that is their standard.
right.
Okay. Thank you. What other agreements, if any, does GWA have with DOD to address contamination in resources returned to the people of Guam after being used by the military? Are there any?
I'm not aware of any, Senator.
And I don't know if you answered this question, but are we anticipating to receive any other wells from the military or from DOD?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay. And we did ask Weary to come because there were some questions that we had that we sent to GWA and you were not able to answer because Weary was in charge.
Yeah, I believe the question related to does GWA have information on every borehole that was installed and whether or not there was any testing
Yes.
associated with those boreholes. We do not maintain such information. I know anecdotally that as part of their work, where he does, I believe, maintain a record of all the wells and boreholes that have been drilled, and I believe they correlate that data with the Guam EPA's permit section relating to wells. So I can't speak on that, but if someone from Weary would like to chime in on that.
Yes, yes. Can we have a representative from Weary to? Thank you. And then please go ahead and identify yourself. No, you please come to the table, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Barry Kim from Wary.
Mr. Berdalio, can you please go ahead and restate it so that Weary can kind of jump in?
Restate the
The
question.
questions that we sent to you. Yeah, that
I
you-
think your question related to whether or not GWA had information about any boreholes or wells that were drilled anywhere on the island, and if we had any information with regard to the testing that might have been conducted associated with those wells or boreholes. And we do not maintain such information. However, I believe that Wary has some of that information and might be available to provide it to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so far we have collected up to 500 wells information regarding borehole construction and depths. Actually, we are operating the Guam Hydrologic Survey website. So whenever we receive all well information, we upload on Guam Hydrologic Survey website.
And are you monitoring the salt levels in water pumped from the aquifer?
Mm-hmm.
What is your frequency of monitoring and the trends that you've observed so far?
So actually, we don't get some information about water pump rate. Actually, So whenever we just receive some information from GWA or environmental consulting firm, then we just upload. And our responsibility is that when there is a drilling construction, and then if they found out whether they have to drill further or not, and based on hydrogeology characteristics, we consult what will be the best way. So that's our responsibility.
Okay, let me just start from the beginning, perhaps, just so that the people that are watching can understand. We've now transitioned from the contaminated water well NES-1 and the mitigations that were put in place, and we discussed the PFAS contamination as regulated from US EPA. Now we're transitioning into a FOIA that I sent to GWA in request of the saltwater intrusion possibilities into our water system. And so some of the questions that we asked, GWA doesn't have the information, nor really is their primary function to do so. They work in collaboration with WERI. And so that's why we have WERI here today.
Okay.
And so we'll start from the beginning so that the people can follow along.
Okay.
Okay? So we'll start with the first question, and this is all within the focus of saltwater intrusion. What is the process of permitting new wells? And this is being asked because there's been some understanding that in certain areas of military bases that new wells are being established, and we don't really have access to that information. So what is the process of permitting new wells?
Actually, so my understanding is that the maximum allowable chloride concentration is 250 milligram per liter. So that means based on that guideline, so we give some ideas, but actually there is some fluctuation of chloride depending on tidal effect, like that. So if actually it is my opinion, if chloride concentration go up to 150, then we can tell there is some fluctuation of chloride concentration. But basically, guideline is 250 milligram per liter in case of salinity.
Okay, so as long as they can calculate the chlorination in the water at a certain level, which is what again, doctor?
Yeah.
What is the level?
250.
250.
Yes.
And then that would lead forward to the authorization of a new well.
Yeah.
Getting a permit to be.
Yeah, that's my understanding. But EPA also actually that is in charge of Guam EPA. So.
I see.
Yeah.
Can Guam EPA answer that question?
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you please come and speak into the mic because the people won't be able to hear. Thank you, Chairman. And please just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Angel Marquez. I'm the Safe Drinking Water Program Manager. The criteria for determining the usability of any well is in threefold. First of all, we ask them to conduct a pump test. And 48 hours they have to pump, and the rate that they're requesting, it should not go a certain level of drawdown. We call it drawdown. That the water is still the same level for that 48 hours. So depending on that criteria, we will determine the capacity of the well that we're going to permit. For the water quality, if the chloride level is over 250 parts per million, we're going to limit their usage or pump rate. So we can ask them to lower down the pump rate so that they're not going to overpump the wellhead.
And does EPA perform checks on these wells to ensure that the pump rate is at the prescribed level?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And how often do you have to do these checks on these specific wells?
It depends on their quarterly report. We actually use their quarterly report on the level of chloride for each well. And if the well is over or beyond the 250, we will give them a warning, that either they reduce the pumpage or shut down the well.
So it's more than just a warning. It's either reduce it or we're going to shut you down.
That's correct, Your Honor.
And this is also on DOD installations,
That's for all wells on the island, Your Honor.
including DOD installations?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, sir. At what stage are we in the permitting process for additional wells proposed by the military?
Before any entity, military is going to apply for a permit, GWA have to co-sign the application. And once GWA signed the application, and we're going to use the same criteria as we determine the pump rate of any well. And of course, they have to have a monitoring well first before we can approve it for a production well.
So, Mr. Bordalio, can you?
So if the question is at what stage are we in terms of permitting any planned military wells?
Yes.
I have not seen any applications for our review for us to concur or not to concur. So in terms of permitting.
Has there been any plans in the past for maybe like since the year 2008, 2009, has there been any permitting for additional wells?
From the military?
Yes.
All I can speak to is
Your
for
time
my
there?
time, and there have been none during my time.
Okay.
The only one that I've seen across my desk has been a private entity which requested, and I think it wasn't even, it was a test well, or no, they did want a production well. They didn't do a test well first, and we declined that one.
I'm hoping that maybe we can talk later and see if we can go to the archives and see what wells there are.
If you want information back to 2008, we can see what we have on file, and we can
Okay.
provide that to you.
Yes. Thank you. So now, basically, what we're saying is, from your time there, you have not permitted any wells to the military.
He would be responsible for the permitting, but I would have to
To sign off
concur,
on it,
right?
yeah.
And I have not seen any come across my desk for concurrence.
Has there been any permitting of wells in?
Not the last 5 years or so, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay. And, all right. I believe that's what we have. Thank you very much, Riri and Guam EPA for your cooperation and collaborative efforts. I do have one more question, and then we will conclude this hearing unless there's any concerns from you guys, or if you'd like to add anything. It's basically, do you have a community credit program? Does GWA have a community credit program?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And perhaps we can meet to discuss that further.
Sure.
Okay. All right. I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and thank you for your time here. It is now 3:21, and this concludes our informational hearing with Guam Water Works Authority. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you.